Would the clerk please read the proposed consent agenda items?
Item number 1, consider approving the reappointment of Christopher Leach, 1st District Representative to the Public Art Commission through December 31st, 2025. Item number 2, consider ratifying the reappointments of Annabeth Serbaugh, Pat Colleton, Michael McCulloch, Stephen Tatum, Mark Keating, Simon Happer, Julie Brewer, Lee Jost, and Erica Razzo, Chairman's Representatives to the Criminal Justice Advisory Council through October 2nd, 2024. Item number 3, consider ratifying the reappointments of Julie Brewer and Richard S. Kaiser, Jr., Chairman's Representatives to the Criminal Corrections Advisory Board through July 1st, 2023. And item number 4, resolution number 101-22, consider approving resolution number 101-22, authorizing the cancellation of outstanding county-issued checks that are at least 2 years old.
Okay, Brent, any comments you'd like to make? This is a kind of an annual activity, but if you would share information with us.
Sure. So the item before you is just our standard housekeeping act where we have more than a few checks that are still outstanding with the bank. And while we cancel these checks, that the liability is still on the county, we just move all that over to countywide. And usually we have about 3 to 6 checks afterwards that get requested. So majority of these checks are one-offs, usually witness fees, jury fees type stuff, things that they get a check, they give it to their employer, employer puts it in the desk drawer, and nothing ever happens to it. So
Okay.
That's the majority of the checks.
All right, thank you. Everything, any changes? Proposed consent agenda will remain as presented. So, all right, thank you. Next action agenda item.
Item number 5, consider approving the November 17th, 2022 business session minutes. Commissioner Myers was not present for the complete meeting. It remains on action.
We'll stay on action, thank you.
Item number 6, consider approving the property and liability insurance policies for calendar year 2023 with the quoting carriers in an amount not to exceed $2,921,424.
Mr. Christensen.
All right, I guess I better recognize myself. Brent Christensen from Financial Management Administration. So I'm here to present the 2023 property and liability insurance renewal and request the board's approval to proceed with the renewals. The recommended renewal premium cost for this amount for this year to not exceed $2,921,424. Considering the current market conditions and the county's continued growth, staff feels the renewals are very favorable to the county. You probably have seen Bill Colvin up here the last few years, the former risk manager. The property and liability insurance market has been difficult the last 2 years, and while it has not been better, it has stabilized, and it's reflected in our renewal. Staff has been anticipating a very difficult renewal process. So when developing the 23 budget last spring, we were very aggressive in what we were budgeting for, and so how the renewal turned out versus the budget is very favorable to the county. The 2023 total insurance premiums are increasing by approximately $172,659 or 6.3% over the 22 premium cost. We actually had budgeted almost $700,000 more than that. So again, that's something that very favorable to the county. And that property, law enforcement liability, public liability, and cyber account for over 80% of the total premium for all policies. The majority of our insurance renewal, 40% of it is on property. And as you can see, our rate increase went only up 1.2%. Last year it was 22%. We were predicting a 15% increase. If you're keeping track, like I know some commissioners are, last year it was a 22% increase, and that's because we had total assets increase by $273 million. This year it's only $30 million. And when I say total assets, I'm talking about buildings, contents, vehicles, emergency equipment, computer hardware, voting machines, radio equipment. That all equates to over $1.5 billion that we're covering under that property liability insurance. Also, with our current incumbent, we received a $57,000 credit that we will be able to use for any future claims that may arise, and those funds will stay in the risk management fund. Additionally, we had some higher increases on the health department liability. While it's not a large dollar, it's over $7,000. The increase is 28.7% for this year. In talking to the brokers, the experiencing averaging is between 15 and 50%, so we're kind of right in the middle of that. And that is due to inflation costs as well as increased client visits at public health. Also, the law enforcement liability, that takes up, again, another 20% of the county's total premium. We don't have a final quote from our current incumbent. They had some system issues that started before Thanksgiving, and while the system's up, they have a long backlog, so I'm hoping to have a better number for you by next week. But they gave us a preliminary number that we're going with at this point in time, which is a 15% increase or a $70,000 increase. You may wonder why the Sheriff's Office has not experienced any spikes in lost claims, but nationally, law enforcement agencies are experiencing a high number of claims that are leading to the increased coverage rates. One item that, again, if you're keeping track from last year, we've added the corrections law enforcement liability for both adult and juvenile. Those are both separate plans, and they started from an April or a July 12-month cycle. We wanted to get those on a calendar cycle, so that would help us from a budgeting perspective, as well as have the latest claim information while we're moving forward. So we're converting that, and that's reflected for the first time as well during this process. And then lastly, the cyber insurance. You probably heard cyber carrier previously from last year did not provide a quote for us, but the current incumbent who took us on last year offered us a quote. We did not get any other quotes. We requested quotes, but did not receive any in time for this board action. The county was provided a quote of $175,000, which is roughly a 6.2% increase, or increase of $11,000 over 22. We were projecting over 140% because that's what it was previously. So we're very happy that it was a 6% increase. Again, this renewal process is very extensive when we go through this process, because we fill out an application process and work with IT as well as the legal department on addressing over a magnitude of questions to provide a clearer picture for the county cyber risk insurers to quote us coverage. And with your support, along with DTI, the county continues to invest in products and people to continue to strengthen and safeguard the county's data and networks. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Once again, what is the total dollar impact or increase?
Total dollar impact was $172,659.
Okay. Other questions? Mr. Ashcraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Christensen, before next week, I just have some incidental questions.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, this will remain on action. Brent, thank you very
No,
much.
it's consent.
Excuse me.
It's consent.
Pardon?
It's on consent.
This is on consent?
Yeah.
No, it's on action.
On action.
You can make
I
the
am
motion.
right for once.
I'll make a note right now.
You can put it on consent as far as I'm concerned.
Okay,
Can we put it on consent?
well, that's up to the majority. I don't want to put a consent item and then have it removed, so if there's anyone who has different feelings,
Also, Hera, is that okay with you? To go on consent?
all right. It'll,
To put it on?
consent,
To put it on consent? I like to have it on action, so if there's any questions.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I thought so, but, so, all right, next item.
Give it the good old boy
My
try.
bad.
Item number 7, resolution number WD 22-038. Conduct a public hearing and consider approving an enlargement to the Consolidated Main Sewer District for a tract of land at 18475 Mission Road, known as Overland Park Fire Station 411. And next week, this item requires a 3/4 majority vote.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners. Susan Pickerick with Wastewater. So there's no funding as part of this request. This request is to consider enlarging the property at 18475 Mission Road into the Consolidated Main Sewer District. This property is owned by Fire District Number 2 and also known as Overland Park Fire Station Number 411. Property is approximately 3.22 acres, and the Fire Services Administrator has signed a valid petition for the property to enlarge into the Consolidated Main Sewer District. There's a map of Fire District here, or excuse me, the property here on your screen. City of Overland Park is right to the south there. Since the property is located within the unincorporated part of the county, but within 3 miles of the City of Overland Park, Kansas 19-270 governs. The City of Overland Park was notified, as was the Planning Department here at Johnson County, of the proposed enlargement, and no comments have been received. Kansas 19-270 also requires the 3/4 majority vote, as the clerk stated, or a minimum of 6 votes in order to enlarge the property. The sewer main extension for this property is to the south. As I noted, there's a development going in down here. So there is no cost to the Consolidated Main Sewer District as part of this request.
Well, if it did not require a public hearing, I think we could put this on consent, but it does require a public hearing, so
does,
we'll remain
yeah.
on action. Mr. Ashcraft?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. McCarrick, so what are the relative merits of moving or this piece of property into the district?
It certainly, it's an addition to the sewers that have already been constructed. It gives them an opportunity to get off septic. They're taking advantage of a property that's getting developed, and it's never easier to put sewers in the ground before houses go up. So it's a great foresight on their part to go ahead and do this.
Thank you. All right, next item.
Item number 8, resolution number WD 22-036. Consider authorizing the wastewater general manager to execute a formal loan application requesting $276,740,000 from the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, KDHE, Water Pollution Control State Revolving Fund, SRF program, as part of the approach to finance the Nelson Wastewater Treatment Facility Improvement Project, and this does require a public hearing.
Ms. Picaric.
Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners. Susan Picaric with Wastewater again. So this action item is related to the Nelson Wastewater Treatment Facility Improvements Project and authorization to execute a formal loan application to KDHE for the Water Pollution Control State Revolving Program. As mentioned by the clerk, this does require a public hearing. SRF program procedures are a little different, so it will be a public meeting followed by a public hearing, all part of the same action item next week. So next week I'll review briefly the information about the project. I won't do that today since we've already discussed it several times. As we know, the Nelson facility is an older facility that needs to be renewed. But since this is part of the financing approach to the Nelson project, I'll just quickly review. So we sold general obligation bonds in October of 21 in the amount of about $16 million for pre-design engineering. Earlier this year, April 28th of 2022, the board authorized to enter into a loan agreement with EPA that finances approximately 49% of the project. And then in June of this year, JCW staff submitted a pre-application form to KDHE to cover approximately 48% of the financing for the Nelson project of the $574 million that's been authorized by the board. We were notified a couple of weeks later that this project was included in the SRF program's intended use plan. The SRF program is administered by Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and it provides financial assistance to Kansas municipalities in the form of loans for construction of wastewater treatment facilities. The funding includes federal capitalization grants, proceeds of revenue bonds, as well as proceeds from revenue bonds. Standard loan terms are typically 20 years, and the interest rates are set at 60% of the market rate. The next step in the process is to submit a formal loan application. The application includes project information, as well as the resolution that we've included with the packet here. that demonstrates governing body support. Following approval of the application, KDHE SRF program will then send loan documents for execution. Because the requested amount is larger than a typical request for the program, as we discussed last week in the Committee of the Whole meeting, KDHE anticipates dividing the total funding into multiple loans, each that will require a set of loan documents, and we'll bring those before the board each time for authorization. We do request that the wastewater general manager be authorized to make application and the loan documents then be brought before the board to execute the loan. As we've discussed before, the project was included in our financial model that was presented most recently in June of this year. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, this requires a public hearing, so it will remain on action. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item.
Item number 9, resolution number 099-22. Consider adopting resolution number 099-22 declaring certain real property at New Century Air Center as surplus, authorizing the Johnson County Airport Commission to request from the Federal Aviation Administration and the Department of Defense the release of such real property from the covenants, conditions, and restrictions placed on the property, and amending the fiscal year FY 2022 to 2026 Capital Improvement Plan, CIP, to include airport, KDOT, maintenance facility relocation capital project, approving a real estate contract with the state of Kansas to simultaneously acquire approximately 17.67 acres and transfer 10.097 acres, and to reimburse KDOT in an amount not to exceed $4 million to construct or move existing facilities, authorizing the reallocation and expenditure of general fund reserves, countywide support funds, in the amount of $4 million to fund the project, and approving the creation of a project account in an amount not to exceed $4 million.
Mr. Otto.
Good morning, Aaron Otto with the Airport Commission. I should start out with an apology and some thank yous. The apology is for whoever gets to make the motion and read that paragraph next week. That's an apology for its length. But we are accomplishing about 5 things in there that could have all been broken up, and I'll explain what those movements are. The thank you is to both Budget with Mark Dapp, Scott Neufeld, and Cindy Donovan Legal for helping us through this effort that's been about 3 years in the making. So let me tell you the 4 things really that are happening here, and then we'll look at the slides kind of getting more detail. The first is we are declaring about 10 acres at New Century as surplus. That's part of the procurement process for disposing of land at New Century that came from the federal government in 1973, was part of a quitclaims deed. The second thing is we're going through and working on the release that both the FAA and DOD have to sign off on allowing that land to be conveyed, in this case, to a state agency, which is the Kansas Department of Transportation. The third is we're creating a project account, which will help facilitate the transfer and funding of this project. And the fourth is the dollars involved that goes into that capital account of about $4 million, which will be used for the relocation and rebuilding of KDOT's facilities in Gardner up into New Century in that red box. So let's talk a little bit more about where this is at and why this is being proposed to you today. So what you see on the screen is an area basically at the corner of Leawood and New Century Parkway. That's just over 10 acres of land. Wastewater sits to the east. The fire department sits to the southwest. This is land that we're proposing be in a simultaneous land swap be turned over to KDOT for them to move their road facilities currently in Gardner, which sit inside of the RPZ, which is called the Runway Protection Zone, and trying to get them and their buildings out of that space. Just to put in perspective, you own 3 runways with obviously 2 entrances to each, so 6 different RPZs. This one at New Century is the only one you don't actually own the land completely for, and that's allowed for some other buildings to get into that space where really, from a safety standpoint, that should be a vacant space. In the past, the Board of County Commissioners and the Airport Commission supported keeping things out of the RPZ and including buying land in this RPZ we'll show here in just a moment. So this is the land that would be turned over to the Department of Transportation. If we go to the next one, we'll see the land coming from the state that will be becoming part of the New Century Air Center and the county's holdings. So on the west side, you've got about a kind of a tree, inaccessible piece of land that's in the RPZ, and then the right you see kind of a upside down L, if you will, or on its side L. That's where most of KDOT's facilities sit. That also is in the RPZ. So those two pieces of land represent the 17.67 acres that the county would be getting in exchange for the land at New Century. So some of these facilities you see on there that KDOT has will be moved, some will be rebuilt, but it will look as the condition of the same quantity and size of buildings will be at New Century in the future. To put in perspective, if you go over in the right corner, that little box next to the right of McDonald's, that is already county-owned land that was bought to prevent other development many years ago from a hotel going inside that RPZ. So through this action, all of the RPZ will be cleared out. Obviously, got the approach lights in the center, with the exception of McDonald's, which is a huge improvement to be able to take control of just over 17 and a half acres in this site. So happy what's in here is there's a purchase contract, there's the resolution to create and alter the CIP and create the capital account. Maybe just speak to timeline for just a minute. This is the first big step, is your approval. Then it would go to the Secretary of Transportation to sign off on as well. Then we start the process that we'll outline a little bit more in the next item in your agenda to go through the release efforts. So nothing changes until both FAA and DOD approve the release. And then after that, we will go back and lease this land you see on the screen, because that will become county-owned land, back to KDOT so they can continue their operations while they go through the process and county planning department to do new buildings at New Century, eventually moving on to New Century on state land at that point. And then we will go through and demo the different items you see left in this RPZ, clearing it out except for one building that we don't have control of. So lots of moving pieces. Happy to answer any questions you have, and thank you for letting me be here.
Again, this is totally related to the KDOT land swap that we've been discussing for some time. Is that right?
Yes, sir. It's just taken a long time to get all the different pieces into alignment, get surveys done, get environmental studies done, and we're finally here. That's why it's taken quite a bit of time to get here as well.
Okay. Questions? Mr. Ashcraft?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Otto, what will be the ultimate outcome of these two parcels? Will they be clear-cut? Will it be turned into a park? What will happen with those?
Great question. So the goal is to not have people inside of an RPZ.
Right.
And so right now, the area that's to the east of McDonald's, that's actually used in a hay lease, and therefore there may be somebody there briefly cutting hay, and that's it. I can envision, depending on what the soil conditions are at the site, there may or may not be anything like that done on the east side of the approach lights. The west side really is a lot of trees. We have to monitor those over time to make sure they don't grow above a certain height. So really, the desire is to keep them basically unoccupied as much as possible. So definitely not a park, not parking, but to return them back to kind of like you see just to the east of McDonald's.
Thank you.
Well, this will remain on action. As a matter of information, Mr. Otto, would you relay to us the new designations on New Century and Executive Airport by the FAA?
I appreciate that. So on an unrelated matter, but similar to your airports, it's a good update for you. As part of the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, the bill, they went through and looked back at the traffic airports have, and also the number of planes that are domiciled and are housed at each airport across the U.S., and they made some designation changes. And so Johnson County Executive Airport moved from being what's called a regional airport, or a local airport, to a regional. And New Century went from being a regional to a national airport. And what that means, it just reflects the volume of traffic that's gone up, but also the number of planes that are housed at both of those airports. It does mean, and I want to give a big asterisk of this, a little bit more federal funding for both of those. But anytime we have a project, those federal funds will be sucked up into it. So really, it's not a net gain for the airport in that sense, but it does bring a little bit more attention. My understanding is maybe a little bit more weight when they're making a decision between Johnson County's airports and somebody else's, because they have that higher designation in the future. And that designation, is my understanding, stays beyond the next 3 years of the bill grant. So that's a good thing in that sense.
Well, I think it also speaks well to your leadership, as well as your staff, as well as the Airport Commission for their decision process and leadership that they've exhibited. So thank you very much. Glad to hear that. Ms. Allenbrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a lot of the things I was going to say has been said, and Commissioner O'Hara and myself have been concerned about the safety zones around the airport. And this is something we can do to make that happen. And so this is something you've been working on with your staff, and I appreciate Mr. Dad's work and that what you guys have put together in getting this done. So, thank you.
All right, this will remain on action. Next item.
Item number 10, request for proposal, RFP number 2021-007. Consider authorizing a contract amendment with Burns & McDonnell for on-call airport engineering services to include land release at a cost not to exceed $800,000 for a period of 1 year, with the option to renew for an additional 3 additional 1-year renewal options.
Mr. Otto.
I'm Aaron Otto with the Airport Commission. One number I didn't point out in the last, to kind of echo what Chairman Eilert was mentioning, we are on track at New Century to hit roughly 84,000 takeoff and landings. To put that in perspective, since 1994, that will tie as the highest number since 1994 there. Every year it just keeps inching up there. And Exec is inching up as well, but New Century really, when I started, was in the 60s. And again, that's not solely staff or anything I've done. It's just, it reflects, I think, the quality and location of your airport in that sense. So what we have here today, this ties back to the last process I mentioned, and I don't really want to bore you with the detail of it, and that's why I brought Cindy down here if we need to get into more depth about this. But it is a pretty significant process to release land that came from the federal government as it relates to the FAA and Department of Defense. Department of Defense has to release this emergency callback clause in case of national emergency. That was part of the quitclaims deed. We had to go through this process, my understanding is in 2008-9 period, when we released land from the New Century Fieldhouse from Johnson County Airport Commission and Johnson County government to the Johnson County Parks and Rec Commission. So what this action is doing is expanding the scope of work for Burns & McDonnell, because when we bid this out, we did not have this process included because we didn't think we'd be doing a land sale. We don't typically sell land. Sometimes we buy, but not typically sell. But this would allow for, because the next big step, once this purchase agreement is signed by both parties, is to start this potentially 4 to 7 month process of trying to have the FAA and the Department of Defense release the land you saw on the screen that's part of the county to go to the state of Kansas for their new KDOT facility. So that's all this is doing, is that it adds that they can do land release in addition to other on-call services for the airport going forward. They've been working with us already on this process, so they are ready to go and move forward with this effort. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions? Mr. Ashcraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Otto, before next week, a conversation on this. I'm trying to understand the kind of the value proposition of the 800,000.
Sure. And thank you for that. Let me be clear. The expected cost of this land release is up to about $102,000. The 800 is our total spending cap that's already in place and has been in place for the last 2 years. So that would cover anything from designs of projects like rebuilding Taxway Bravo at Exec or whatever the case is. This specific project going through the land release is expected to cost, up to $102,000 to $120,000, $125,000. So the 800 is the same. The only thing that's really being added to this is where it says the land release being part of their scope of work they can perform. But happy to visit some more afterwards.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, this will remain on action. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Next
Thank you.
item.
Item number 11, IFP number 2022-079. Consider authorizing a contract with Stanger Industries Incorporated to modify the humidification and HVAC system at the Criminalistic Laboratory Crime Lab located at 11890 South Sunset Drive, Olathe, Kansas, 66061, in an amount not to exceed $585,000.
Mr. Petey.
Good morning, Brian Petey with Facilities. The Sheriff's Crime Lab processes and the types of chemicals they've used has evolved, and we need to modify the current HVAC system to accommodate these. We did go out for bid where we have a probable cost of $808,000 versus the awarded or the contemplated award of $585,000. We're comfortable proceeding with this project.
Questions? Mr. Ashcraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pedic, I'd like to visit with you. I was trying to understand the difference between the probable cost estimate and the actual bid. It's definitely in the right direction, but yeah. I'm trying to understand that difference. So if we could visit before next week, I'd appreciate
Certainly.
it.
All right, this will remain on action. Next item.
Item number 12, consider authorizing the Mental Health Department to add 21 FTE positions for the Johnson County Mental Health Center and authorize the reallocation and expenditure of fund balance reserves for FY 2023 in the amount of $2,100,000.
Mr. Deweese.
Thank you, Tim DeWeese, Mental Health Center. And I have a presentation that I think will come up here in a second. So with this being, I believe this is probably the largest request that I've been before you to make. So wanted to provide a little bit of context and background and then answer any questions that you guys might have. So something that has happened within the field of mental health is there is a process called becoming certified as a community behavioral health center. And this certification requires, it has some specific requirements that you provide some specific services, but then it also has some requirements in regards to expectations that you have to meet, specifically with what type of clients that you serve. Fortunately, we have historically provided the types of services with the exception of one, and we came to you all in August, earlier this year in August, asking for a few positions, I believe it was 6 positions, to start to integrate physical health care within the mental health center, because that's one of the expectations, is that many of the people that have serious mental illness, we know they die 25 years younger than the general population because they don't seek primary health care. And so this is an attempt to make sure that for chronic conditions, we're able to provide the services on site so that when they see their psychiatrist, they could also see their primary care physician. It does us no good to treat someone with schizophrenia and they walk outside the door and have a heart attack. So this way, we can provide that integrated care, integrated services. And that's really one of the purposes of a CCBHC. When you look at the criteria, there are some specific criteria that go along with becoming a CCBHC. That is specific staffing requirements, specific access requirements, meaning that historically the way that community mental health centers worked was if someone got the courage to call for services, we would say, well, let's set you up with an intake that'll be 2 to 3 weeks. And then once they came in 2 to 3 weeks later, if they needed to see the psychiatrist, it could be up to 6 to 7 weeks after that. The fact is that if people needed treatment 6 or 7 weeks down the road, they would wait 6 or 7 weeks to ask for treatment. So same-day access is critical. And so one of the things that we put in place right after I became the director was an open access model. In fact, since you all appointed me as the director in October of 2014, we have been preparing ourselves for this opportunity. So looking at how we can better care coordinate, making sure that we have the scope of services in place, making sure that we have the reporting requirements, and then also that we have the infrastructure and the organizational authority to provide the services that we want to provide. So there's a significant reason that this is important to the community mental health system. In 2014, the federal government passed the Excellence in Mental Health and Healthcare and Addictions Act, and it set aside 8 states to do pilot projects. In 2021, there was another Excellence in Mental Health and Addiction Act, and that then expanded the number of states that were authorized to create CCBHCs. So in 2022, our Kansas legislature took action as part of the Kansas Mental Health Modernization Act, and it authorized KDADS, the state, to certify mental health centers as CCBHCs. And the reason that that is important is not only does then it require certain services to be consistent across all 26 mental health centers, for the individual centers that become CCBHCs, it drastically changes the way that they're reimbursed for care. And so what happens is that historically, community mental health centers have been reimbursed at a fee-for-service, in a fee-for-service model. So I provide an hour of therapy, I get paid for an hour of therapy. What we've known is that the payment that we receive for an hour of therapy comes nowhere near covering the cost of that service. What CCBHC certification does, it moves us out of a fee-for-service model of payment to what we call a prospective payment system. And that prospective payment system is basically one that covers the cost. What they do is they will ask for, and what they have done, is ask for a cost study from the Mental Health Center. We work with the state along with the federal government to look at our total costs of service, and then they reimburse us a fee, give us a fee to cover the entire cost. That then will be reevaluated every couple of years. Right now, they're thinking it will be reevaluated every 2 years. And then I think as we get better at being able to look at what our costs will be year to year to year, we'll be able to move that maybe from 2 years to 4 years. But the key is that it allows a historically underfunded system of care to be funded at a level that meets the needs of its community. And so that's why this is so big, and that is why we have been before you to ask for positions earlier this year and then now. So if we look at that continued timeline from this point forward, as I mentioned earlier, in June of this year, we were identified as a CCBHC. We were actually one of the first, I think we were the first mental health center in the nation to be able to do that without federal involvement, so that we were able to do that and receive our certification without being part of the federal pilot program. And really the reason that I chose to do that is I didn't want to get into a grant system and then not be assured that there were ongoing mechanisms for payment. With the passage of the Modernization Act by the state of Kansas, this is a way to pay for this model ongoingly through the legislation that we received and through that prospective payment plan. There's a 3-phase process that we've begun in July. As I mentioned, we came and asked for the 6 positions that we would use to begin to implement primary care. We started the prospective payment system in August, so we've started receiving that new rate that covers our cost. And that brings us to this second phase of request. And what I've referred to this phase to our staff is really the workforce stage, the workload stage. So the first piece of that will be 11 positions. We will be adding a new team to our adult services. We'll be adding a second team to our children and family services, which would be 6 positions. And just to give you an idea of why that's important and why I would term this the workload phase of this project, is that currently, if you look at our caseload size, and I know I've talked about caseload size before when I've been before you, there are currently 273 clients in excess of our standard of 20-to-1 ratio. So we should have 21 clients for every case manager that we have. Right now, we have 273 clients in excess of that ratio. So it would take about 13.6 positions for us to get within that standard. On the kids side, we're a little bit better. We're 50 clients in excess of the 15-to-1 ratio that we have. And so it would take about 3 case managers on the kids side to be able to meet that standard. So this this second phase of request is really about getting to meeting our current need and being able to meet that need efficiently. We haven't talked yet about what we would need if we were going to expand to further meet the need in our community. In addition to those positions, there are a few other positions that we would need to expand on based upon the requirements of CCBHCs, and that is there's not only do we want to be a responsive system, we also want to start to move upstream and do prevention. And so there's some prevention efforts that we really can do upstream to hopefully create a mechanism that people will no longer need this level of care in the future, so that we can begin to prevent some of the major illnesses and the impacts that those illnesses have on people's lives. There are also some specific staff training functions that have to occur, and so we're adding some staff to our staff development team, as well as then emergency services, and quality and integrity, because there's a lot of checks and balances that we need to do in order when we do the billing. I will say that we have a really good process with our quality and integrity team right now. We very rarely do not have to pay money back or have to refund money. We pass all of our audits in a really I would say stellar way. Compared to most community mental health centers. And so that will be one additional position that we would need to kind of just keep up with the demand as we add these new staff. What that looks like then is the 21 positions that we're here before you to ask us to authorize. We will have our first certification review in January. It actually will be January 31st into February. That's where they will come and review to determine whether or not we will receive our continued certification. With these positions in place and moving forward with the plan, we expect that there will be no problem with us achieving our certification. And then we will also be back in April or May to ask for a CCBHC service expansion. And I want to just share that just to put it on your radar. If you think about, and I know that Commissioner Ashcraft has asked about this before, is how do we get our fingers or hands around the need that exists within our community? So if you think about our population in Johnson County is roughly 613,000 people. When you look at the data, what the data will tell you is that about 20% at any given time, 20% of the general population will suffer from a mental health condition. And so if you think about that with our population, that's roughly 118,000 people that could benefit from a mental health intervention. That 118,000 people, those are the individuals that are served by primary commercial insurance and by our private providers across the community. When you think about what the mental health center does, we really focus on providing services to those adults that have a serious mental illness and those kids that have a severe emotional disturbance. And when you take a look at what that population would look like within Johnson County, it's roughly about 3% on adults. It's anywhere between 6 to 7% for kids. But that's 18,000 individuals that the mental health center itself should be serving. Currently, right now, at any given time, we're serving about 8,300 clients. If you look at that funnel and see then there's 8,100, roughly 8,100 people that fall through, there's some new data that's coming out about what could we expect the crisis services within a community look like for a community of our size, 613,000. And based upon those analysis and those models, we should see about 8,100 people each year in crisis. Currently, we see about 7,500 people in crisis each year. So we're a little bit better in our response within our crisis services, but we still have a little bit ways to go to meet the entire demand that exists within our community. So that is why I'm here today to ask for those 21 positions. I think, as it said earlier, it's a reallocation of our funds, our what am I trying to say?
Reserve balance.
Reserve balance, thank you. So that we can use those funds to start those positions. And with that, I'll ask or answer
Mr.
any
DeWeese,
questions.
thank you for sharing this information. It is an important program, and I'm glad to see that there is an opportunity to be fully reimbursed for the programs rather than a flat fee. So both of those would be important. I would encourage commissioners, if you would like to have a personal sit-down with Mr. DeWeese, a lot of information, a lot of data, and I'm sure he'd be willing to do that. Questions, Ms. O'Hara?
So the $2.1 million from general reserves, that will be reimbursed through the state?
So that will be, that is in the process. We've already started drawing down that PPS rate, so some of it we've already received, but yes, those will be dollars that we receive as a fee from the state.
Okay, so basically, we're fronting, we're fronting the cost, and then...
No fronting. We've already started billing that process, and we have a healthy reserve. So what we're basically asking is to utilize our current reserve to pay for these positions. And then ongoingly, because I would never want to come before you and ask for positions that I can't ongoingly pay for. Ongoingly, they will be paid for through this PPS mechanism, which we started receiving back in August.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Myers?
Just a comment, Chairman, thank you. A lot to digest.
Yes.
But very good information. It all sounds extremely positive to me. First thing came to my mind is this should really help with staff retention, and that would solve a lot of problems that we seem to see here at the county with retaining staff, and just an overall better way of doing business and creating positive results for our residents. So I'm excited with what I'm hearing.
Thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Ashcraft?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, your advice is good, so I would ask Mr. DeWeese or Mr. Fortney to visit with me. I'd be interested in the long-term funding outlook, the metrics that you're proposing, the existing and the potential. And I'm also interested in 21 staff is a fairly substantial increase in staff, understanding the impact on facilities and services, and if that's covered by funding or if there are other issues that we'll have to deal with.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? All right, well, this will remain on action. Before you leave the podium, Tim, you have scheduled a trip this afternoon about 3 o'clock.
I have.
For commissioners and any staff to visit the RSI Center in Wyandotte County, which is a joint project of Johnson, Wyandotte, KCK. Could you tell us what activities occur at that, I'll call it the Crisis Intervention Center?
Absolutely. So RSI, we had a crisis. We partnered with Wyandotte County back in the early 2000s and developed a crisis stabilization center, and it was located at KU. And that went really well for a number of years. And then KU had some change in leadership, and they decided they no longer wanted to do that. So it left us without a crisis facility for a number of years. About 7 years ago, 8 years ago, right before I became the director, the state came to Wyandotte Health and Johnson County Mental Health Center and asked if we would create a regional crisis stabilization center. And at that time, we partnered together, identified a location. It was the old Rainbow Mental Health Facility, which was a state hospital. It was called Rainbow Services, Inc. We moved out of that old building, and it was demolished, and moved into a new building, which you'll be going today. So we don't call it Rainbow Services, Inc. anymore. We call it RSI since it's not on Rainbow Boulevard any longer. But it really is a place that there's no wrong door. Police, family can take someone there. They can be evaluated. There are 3 primary services that are provided there. The first is what they call detox or sobering unit. So if someone's under the influence and just needs 24, 72 hours to detox, they can go and we'll see the detox unit today. There is an observation area where someone can stay up to 24 hours, and they have some nice recliners where we're able to have someone just sit, relax, and chill, and so to speak, kind of de-escalate the situation for up to 24 hours. And then there's a stabilization side where people can actually stay up to 14 days as long as 30 days if needed to stabilize and start on new medications. We then, within Johnson County, also have a number of beds within our crisis residential facility so that if someone needs even further stabilization or maybe they don't have stabilized housing, then we can move them into our crisis residential facility for up to another 30 days while we find a permanent housing solution for them. So there's an entire kind of spectrum of services that are provided through RSI and our partnership.
The reason I asked Mr. Deweese to set this up is because with all the discussion that's going on, I think it's important for us on the commission to completely understand the level of services that are already offered within our county. So Tim, thank you very much for that. And I hope we can set another date where the opportunity to visit and observe the activities can be carried out also.
Absolutely,
So,
anytime
thank
anybody
you.
wants to go.
Thank you. All right. Next, Ms. O'Hara.
Thank you. How many beds are available
So
for?
it's 10, 8, and 8. And those are the COVID numbers because we had to reduce to 1 bedroom each. So as we continue to come out of the pandemic, then it'll probably expand back to its original, which is basically 10, 10, and 10. And that would be the number of beds.
So-
Actually, I should be a little more specific. It's really 10 mats, 10 recliners, and 10 beds.
Okay, and then, so that's, that's the regional facility, and then how many beds do we have in our county facility?
For crisis residential services, 5.
5. So we're talking about 10 to divide between Wyandotte County and Johnson County, and then we have an additional 5 in Johnson County.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah. Thank you.
Next item. This will remain on action.
Item number 13, consider authorizing annual support and subscription renewals to SHI International Corporation in an amount not to exceed $181,630.85 for Checkpoint Endpoint Security Software utilizing Sourcewell contract number 081419-SHI.
Mr. Nixon.
Bill Nixon, Department of Technology and Innovation. As Linda read, this is a request for our monthly or yearly maintenance for our endpoint management software. It's been in use since 2017. It's basically software that runs on any county device to help prevent ransomware, virus attacks, and things like that. It's coming to you because we're exceeding the 10% threshold of an increase, and some of that is due to adding some additional features that will help us with cybersecurity insurance and also further protect the county environment. The cost is roughly $2.44 at endpoint, and industry standard is about $2.50 at endpoint, so we're under that amount. And really the ROI around this investment is to help us prevent a cyber attack, which some recent numbers are a cyber attack is normally about $4 million or so on average. So I think there's great benefit to this software.
Okay, questions? Mr. Ashcraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Nixon, no doubt that security is critical. Just was wondering, do you ever consider any other products that may come onto the market? Obviously, you've been satisfied with this provider, and I'm not questioning that, but as costs do tend to escalate. Is this a competitive market, or are we locked in with this particular vendor?
There would be a cost to switch to a different endpoint software provider, but this is a competitive market. The features that we get out of Checkpoint are valuable. We also use some other services from Checkpoint, so we get some discounts there. But every time we do a maintenance renewal like this, we do a review of what else is available in the marketplace, and that's part of our standard practice. So with this one, we're comfortable with where we are today to continue to use Checkpoint as our endpoint security. It's used both for DTI and for GEMS, along with parks and with library.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Action or
Consent would be fine with me.
consent?
Commissioner O'Hara has the greatest sensitivity to the issue.
All right. We'll try consent. All right, so noted. Thank you. Next item.
Item number 14, consider authorizing a contract with Mission Electronics Incorporated for audio-visual technology upgrades at the Justice Annex Building located at 588 East Santa Fe Street, Olathe, Kansas, 66061, in an amount not to exceed $101,229 per State of Kansas Contract 42601, and create a project account for this purpose in the amount of $110,000 to include owner's contingency.
Okay.
Bill Nixon, Department of Technology, again. This is, as Linda read, for upgrade of some AV equipment across 4 different conference rooms within the Justice Annex Center. We have funding for this, basically. It's a contribution from GEMS, Court Services, and Corrections that all use those conference rooms there. And we really, rather than doing this piecemeal, given some of the supply chain challenges we've had with AV equipment and cost increases, we basically went out for a RFP, for this, locked in some prices for this work that will probably take over the year to implement, especially given some of the supply chain challenges. So this is for AV replacement. We're locking in pricing for the next year to do the work, and we want to create a project account so that the funding we have this year can be used to pay for it next year.
Good. Questions? Mr. Ashcraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Nixon, this really appears to be a fairly diminutive amount, but I was just wondering, what are we getting? You said 4 conference rooms. What are we getting for that? Because some of we used to call it the food court. I know it's Justice Annex, but that's a fairly new facility. Was that not new equipment at the time? Has it been broken or overused? I don't mean that. I mean, stuff happens.
Yeah. No. A lot of this equipment has been in use for a number of different years, and it eventually wears out. Some of it is really the monitors and the TVs that are there. The one room has 2 large, I think they're 90-inch TVs that basically have gone out of service and need to be replaced. And we're looking at more effective ways of doing it. But a lot of this equipment, because it does get used, it has a lifespan of about 5 to 7 years.
Thank you.
Perhaps staff, Mr. Waters, maybe you can speak to this. That annex was put in service, about 10 or so years ago?
Has it been that long?
That is a good question. I think it was 8 years ago.
Yeah.
8 years ago.
Okay, thank you. All right, consent or action?
Consent.
All right, we'll try consent on this one. Next item.
Item number 15, consider approving and authorizing an increase of $900,000 for the Johnson County Square Phase 2 project, bringing the total project authorization to an amount not to exceed $2,900,000, and authorize and approve the reallocation and expenditure of general fund reserves, countywide support funds, in an amount not to exceed $450,000 for the partial funding of the project in cooperation with the City of Olathe.
Mr. Waters.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Commissioners. Joe Waters, Assistant County Manager. I'm the one bringing this project to you because I'm the one who started bringing it to you earlier this year, and I guess actually a year or so before that. We are requesting additional funding on this work that was approved in August by the board at a $2 million project, the cost to be shared equally between the city and the county. At that time, the board also approved the utilization of our term and supply contractors and receiving competitive bids from those contractors. Gone through that work. Unfortunately, the pricing came in quite a lot higher than the estimate. The facilities department, the architect, the low bid contractor worked on value engineering ideas now for weeks, actually several months as it turns out, trying to lower the cost, and they're pretty successful in doing so, reducing it by about $500,000. But that still leaves us in order to $900,000 short in order to complete the basic scope of work that was described in the master plan. The city took up this item on Tuesday evening, and they are supportive of providing their half of that expenditure. So that additional $450,000 from the city was approved on Tuesday. Ultimately, in reviewing the details of the bids and finding ways to reduce cost, the project really is a victim of the kinds of inflation pressures, material availability, and just other sorts of market conditions available, labor and subcontractors and all those sorts of things that many projects are suffering from. Should the board approve this increase, there is an agreement in place that the board acted upon that would need to be amended between that MOU between the city and the county to tie up the details around this. And I would also note that the project, of course, because of the cost problem, has not yet been initiated. So the original completion schedule that was hoped for and targeting for May will need to slip to the end of the summer. Target now would be completion by the time of Old Settlers that first week in September.
So, Ms. Waters, the city has authorized their increase as our partner in this, and our funds supporting this increase would come from where?
They would come from the same source, that original ARPA state and local recovery funds that were utilized through lost revenue recapture that established the countywide support funds. They reside in our general fund today and would come from countywide support.
Questions? Mr. Ashcraft?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Waters, I believe we've had a brief conversation on this. I would like to have a more in-depth conversation before next week.
Yes, sir.
Well, this will remain on action, so thank you. Next item.
Item number 16, consider authorizing the reallocation and expenditure of fund balance reserves for fiscal year FY 2022 for the county general fund in an amount not to exceed $900,000 to cover increased employee payout costs related to vacation and sick leave, and the reallocation and expenditure of fund balance reserves for FY 2022 for the 911 fund in amount not to exceed $640,000 to reimburse the city of Overland Park for costs associated with their 911 system.
Ms. Symes.
Yes, Robin Symes with the Budget Financial Planning Department. This is for the County General Fund for countywide employee payout for vacation and sick leave. Due to the accumulation of higher leave balances during the pandemic and the increased turnover that we've seen here at the county, the vacation and sick leave is running higher than normal years, and we're hoping that the $900,000 amount is the highest amount and that we will actually come in lower. It's just we haven't seen what will hit for November and December, so we just want to be conservative on that estimate. For the second item, the 911 fund, City of Overland Park notified the county of an invoice that we were not aware of for 2022, and so they do have sufficient funds within their 911 funding, but we do need to use the reserves just for that budget authority for 2022.
Any questions? Ms. O'Hara?
Why aren't these two separate issues?
They're separate funds. So we need approval for the countywide funds from the county general fund, and then the 911 fund is a separate fund. And so we need approval for those use of
So there's a
reserves.
$900,000 anticipated expenditure for related vacation and sick leave,
Yes, payout.
and then there's a $640,000 payout.
No, not payout. It's an invoice for the 911 fund, and it's the City of Overland Park. So as you know, they have their own funding within for the PSATs. And so,
Correct.
yes, so we just need that authority because we make that payment, and that funding is there.
My question is why aren't these two separate issues? It seems like that we have two separate issues in this one.
There's two motions here.
Well, there are two motions.
It's a motion, yeah, within one. It's just a use of reserves. We usually come at the end of the year for any items that may require use of reserves. And so one is for the countywide general fund and one is for the 911 fund.
Correct. So I would prefer to have these split so it'd be two votes. I mean, there's going to be two votes anyway, so I think that it'd be just cleaner if this was split.
It's a technicality, but, there's no reason not to have two motions on them, so that's fine. Other questions, Mr. Ashcraft?
Ms.
Yes.
Ms.
Signs.
Symes, excuse me. Bad habit, I apologize.
That's okay.
Before next week, just a couple of details I'd like to learn about.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right, this will remain on action. Next item.
Item number 17, consider authorizing a contract with GT Distributors Incorporated in the amount of $455,297 and the subsequent purchase of 350 Glock handguns, holsters, and related attachments utilizing Kansas State Cooperative Contract Number 44085.
Mr. Dugan.
Tom Dugan with the Sheriff's Office. This is a request to enter into contract to replace the majority of our handguns. The reason for the replacement, there are two. One is our weapons are aging, and many of our weapons are beyond the 7 to 10 years that the manufacturer requests as a replacement age. We're also moving to red dot technology, which is generally laser sighting for the weapons. The current weapons that we have are not able to be mounted. Red dot technology is not able to be mounted on the current weapons that we have. So using that technology will require us to replace the weapons first. We are not requesting any funding for this. We're going to use forfeiture funds to make the purchase. We have the funding, we have the budget authority, but we require approval to enter into contract to make the purchase. The vendor that we're using is what's called a blue label distributor. Glock allows certain distributors to sell weapons at a lower cost than other distributors would be able to. This particular blue label distributor also has a state contract, which brings the price down even lower, so we're getting these weapons at a very good price. At that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions of Mr. Dugan. Ms. O'Hara.
Just curious, what happens to the weapons that we now have?
They will buy them back from us, so we'll sell them back to Glock.
Okay.
Other questions?
So this contract includes the credit that we get from them on buying back our current.
We will get the credit later. This is only 70% of the weapon replacement. We'll do the rest of the replacement next year, and at that time, we'll get the credit for
Okay.
the trade-ins.
Thank you.
All right, other questions?
That answered mine. Thank you.
Pardon? Consent?
I'm good with consent.
I want to leave it on, I want to leave it on action just for the public to understand what's going on.
So noted. Next item.
Item number 18, consider approving a memorandum of understanding with Northwest Consolidated Fire District for a fire station within the former Sunflower Army Ammunition Plant, and to authorize the reallocation expenditure of general fund reserves, countywide support funds, in the amount of $500,000 to fund the initial phase of the fire station project, and to approve the creation of a Sunflower Fire Station project account in the same amount.
Mr. Connor.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Commissioners. Joe Connor, Assistant County Manager. So the item you have before you today is to, one, is to look at the MOU that we've developed with the Northwest Fire Board. This provides a general outline or structure for us working together to try to assist that fire board with the building of the fire station. We also believe that it provides protection for the county for the investment that's been pledged to be made. So we want to put some framework around that. And then the $500,000 request to establish a project account is really necessary now because even though we don't have funding partners, we don't know what the total budget is, those decisions are coming, and the fire board has been made an offer for some land to place their fire station on. So that needs to be evaluated, and we need to start that process. So that's why if you look at the MOU, this is a very conservative approach, and it would come back to you in chunks for requests for additional money once certain things are met. There's just so much unknown at this point. We really don't know how to establish a different framework, but we know that if we're going to assist the fire board, we need to get started. And so this is a very conservative way to do that, but again, and put some framework around it. And I would say that at Tuesday night at the Northwest Fire Board meeting, this was presented to them, and they unanimously approved the structure and the framework.
I think this memorandum of understanding is a great step forward, and it includes not only representatives of the Fire Board and Johnson County, but also City of DeSoto. So all those parties involved will be communicating together as we move forward. Ms. O'Hara?
Isn't this setting a precedent for the other fire districts? I mean, isn't the point of the fire districts for each to be independently financed within that district? Isn't that the purpose of the fire districts?
That's yes, that's a taxing
And
authority.
isn't this a result of the huge tax increment finance district that DeSoto has granted, and it's eroding the tax base so they have no money? Because all of the fire district monies will be diverted for 20 years. And so now the rest of the county is going to have to pick up the tab to build this fire station for Panasonic.
That decision has been made. The commission authorized $7.5 million towards the fire station. This is the process to assure that the expenditures are carried out in an appropriate manner. So, the previous question has already been decided. Other questions? Mr. Ashcraft, excuse me, Ms. O'Hara?
Well, it says reallocation of general fund reserves. So, I mean, if we've allocated them dollars, then why are we using reserves?
This is in the countywide support fund.
That's where the money's at.
Part of the general fund.
Oh, the $60 million that we stashed. Yes, okay, I forgot.
Thank you. Mr. Ashcraft.
To clarify, this $500,000 is part of the $7.5 million that was approved by the board
Back in July.
Okay.
That is correct.
And to comment or reflect on the chairman's comments, this appears to be basically procedural. You're trying to develop a structure, a mechanism in order to distribute those funds? Is that what you're trying to do, or are you doing something else here?
No, that's exactly what we're trying to do. Again, we expected to come back to you with a fully prepared program, budget, but the timing is just not allowing that to happen. So this is an interim step to put some safeguards in place and protect our investment.
Okay.
For instance, there needs to be some design work done. There needs to be some evaluation of the land area that's been offered. And so this will help us, this will help the fire district do that. And I would remind everyone, we do have authority, budget approval ability over fire districts. So we are involved with our districts rather than the city fire departments already. So, and we sit as the board as fire district number 2. So those activities are already in place. Miss Allenbrand.
No, Commissioner Ashcraft and yourself, you already said everything I was going to cover, so
Okay.
thank you for all the work you've done on this, Mr. Connor.
Well, do you want remain on action or consent?
Action.
Action, okay. Why am I
Well,
not
you
surprised?
tried.
Yes. I remember the votes on the 7.5 million. So,
Yeah. I'm bringing my sleeping
right.
bag.
Thank you.
all right, this will remain on action. Thank you, Mr. Connor. Now, we do have the 2 items that were continued to next week. Do we need to put those in the agenda now, or I'm not sure whether we want to do that at the beginning or the end of this agenda?
You can do it now.
Which
So
would the
I'm
commission-
asking Peg if we need to add them. We do, even though the earlier motions were made, because it is ready for, our plan is to do it next week.
Did the motion include this meeting December 15th?
Yes, it did.
Okay, so those will
We
be
covered
put.
I'm sorry?
It's okay because it was included in the motions earlier that it was stated for December 15th.
Right, but my question is it at the beginning of our action agenda or at the conclusion thereof? That's
It
my
would be
question.
at the beginning, but it's your preference if you desire to move it elsewhere.
Does the commission have a preference? Ms. O'Hara?
I would like to have the sheriff's comments on what the changes are going to be. So if we could review that now.
Well, Mr. Pedig, the item will be fully considered next week. And so whether it's Mr. Pedig or others who want to comment, I'm asking, do we want to do that at the beginning of the action agenda or the end of our agenda?
Well,
Which is the preference?
What I'm requesting is to allow the sheriff to make some comments as to what the change is going to be so that we have a week to be able to digest that.
The item is not on our agenda today. We've continued it to next week, so that information can be shared between now and then.
Can
And
we-
if the
can
sheriff
we-
wishes to make any comments next week, that's fine.
Can we add it to the agenda review?
Pardon?
Can we add it to this current agenda review?
Well, we will add it to the agenda. I'm not sure what comments the sheriff would like to make, but if he's present,
Sheriff
Sheriff,
is
you're
here.
welcome to make any comment.
Yeah, it's okay because it's being.
We've just met with a bunch of stakeholders, and we're waiting on some decisions from some of the stakeholders involved in this thing before we make any comment at all.
All right, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, well, we'll put this on the beginning of the agenda. Is that
Yes.
okay? So noted. All right, are there any other items?
No, sir.
All right, well, next Thursday will be our last meeting. It'll be a long agenda consideration, I am sure. So you might want to bring a lunch or something. So with that, we are adjourned. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.